Welcome to the Accelerate Campfire. I'm Lyndon Bowen, and today I'm joined by an amazing entrepreneur. I truly hope you enjoy hearing their experiences and life path. Listen in. Erica Owens is actually the CEO and founder of Frugal on the Fly. She is also the creator of 52 Ways to Find Joy Checklist. Frugal on the Fly creates access to free and affordable experiences for Metro Detroit families. She's also a TEDx Detroit producer and activist, most recently participating in Detroit's Knit for Good marathon to raise awareness about food insecurity, where she actually knit for 12 hours straight. So, guys, please give a warm welcome if you haven't already. I know we've been having a really good time in here with Erica. Please give a warm welcome to Erica Owens today, guys. We actually have the first answer to the poll in the chat. So the audience is curious to know, what were you doing before you launched your business?
I was doing marketing and social media for small businesses in Detroit.
So you were doing social media management. How did that kind of like fold over into you starting Frugal on the Fly? Could you kind of give us a little bit of that journey?
Yeah, so I left corporate America when my son was 2 and, kind of started my own firm and helped friends with their social media because there was this was in 2014. So a lot of people knew they needed to be on all the things, didn't know how to be on all the things, maybe couldn't afford a firm. So I kind of filled that gap in the middle. And I was also, working from home and making it flex. And so I could, go around, tour the city. And I was always looking at sites for things to do, journalism background. So I was good at research. And we had a tight budget. So I would always find the free and cheap events to do, free concerts, library events, all kinds of fun things, free museum days. There's certain museums in town that have free days several times a year. So those were the days that we went to those museums. And I kept having my friends text me for 2 years straight, what are you doing this weekend? You always know what to do. You always know what to do. And then other people would ask me, I don't know how you do all the things. How do you afford it all? I'm like, oh my gosh, we only go to the free events. So a light bulb moment came when I'm like, wow, what if I have this hub for people to find all of these things and kind of follow around and, show people the secrets, if you will, because for me, it seemed like they were really out there and available. And the more I found out, people didn't know how to look for them or didn't have the time. So that's how Frugal on the Fly started. And so it started 4 years ago. And microblogged on Instagram, put it up on Facebook, and I didn't really do too many events until the pandemic. So my whole business model and everything I did changed at the height of the pandemic. And I don't know if you want me to go further.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so how did you have all these frugal ways to find joy, and then the pandemic comes and shuts everything down. How
Yeah,
did
and
you
for a
pivot?
business like
Yeah.
mine, it was tough because I don't know if you remember in March 2020, in those first couple months, everything was free.
Mm,
Fender, you could learn to play the guitar. Adobe was lifting fees. You could learn anything, do anything, be in any sort of supportive group event, chats, all the things. So I was spending endless amount of time, right? Getting all the things out there. And then, people were getting Zoom fatigued and all that, and they didn't
mhm.
want to do all those things. So I kind of started to focus on really cool things you could do at home with kids. We lived on a corner, so we would do these chalk obstacle courses all wrapping around our house, just fun things to do outside. The kids are bored or things to do inside. And then in June of 2020, I heard that they were looking for organizations in town to pass out free produce. Just needed more hands on deck to do that. That was the USDA Farm to Families grant. And we always had a volunteer arm of our business. I grew
Mm.
up that way. I raised my son that way. And I was like, oh, wow, he doesn't have school on Fridays. This would be cool. Let's see what we can do. And so I signed up for 25 boxes. They were 32-pound boxes of produce each. And I was like, well, gosh, I think I can get 25 in my van, called around a few friends, found a parking lot in Hamtramck that I had the okay to be in. And I was like, how are people going to find it, right? And so I just thought, marketing background, I'll make it an event. So I
Mm.
made a Facebook event. I just said, hey, no questions asked. If you need it, I got it. And I put it up at, I think, midnight before. And we were like, starting at 9 a.m. that next day. And
Wow.
so I was like, I just hope this goes well. This was a lot of fresh food to move. And I had called a couple other community leaders in Hamtramck, like, hey, if nobody comes, like, is there a couple neighborhoods I could deliver to? And they're like, we got you if you can't move it. So we moved it all in 20 minutes.
20
And my
minutes.
son was looking at me.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? And I was like,
Yes.
we actually ran out because we had people waiting. So my son, he's 8 and he's devastated because he's like, oh my gosh, like we don't have enough. And I said, yeah, but we'd have to drive all the way back to the time it was TCF Center. Now it's Huntington Place. And, load up more food, drive all the way back here. So it's like 45 minutes. And he was like, well, just call. And I'm like, well, you don't understand. It's a spreadsheet. Every organization had to fill out like how many boxes they could take. I said, everything was allotted. He's like, just call, just call. So he wouldn't let it go. And so I called and they're like, oh my gosh, one of the organizations couldn't come. We have extra. So he's thrilled. And so I said, well, now we have to explain to everybody in line, like, we may have more. I can only fill like what will fit in this minivan. And so we tell everybody that and like cross our fingers because now I'm going back to get a whole nother load and hope they stay, right? And so we come back and everyone in line got a box and then we ran out. And it was pretty magical. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, I think we have something here. So the next week I doubled it. And then the next week I doubled it. And before I knew it, I was feeding 2,000 families every Friday morning.
2,000 families. Well, I mean, I
So we
need
did
to
it.
just pause and give it like a round of applause for that. That is amazing, Erica. That is
So we
in the height of the COVID and everything. That's amazing.
Yeah, this is the height of it. This is, way before vaccines, all of that stuff. And
Wow.
also, we already had a food insecurity problem here, and families were struggling. And then, we have a pandemic. They've lost their jobs, they've lost, access to things like all the reasons, right?
Yeah.
And illness, add all the things together. So it was on the rise. And so in 23 weeks, we had passed out over 1 million pounds of produce.
Wow.
So
I think you
then
just need
that
to
was the
pause and
moment.
let that sink in.
So that was the moment where it's like, you know what? We can do really big things. We were one person plus my son. So 2 people that didn't know what they were doing, have no experience in this world whatsoever, but just said, I'm going to try.
Yeah.
And in the whole process of it all, we had other people join us. So, through all those weeks, I needed people. I was moving a ton of food. So, I gained like a 40-person volunteer team. I had friends that would just share it. I ended up getting free bigger vehicles every week from La Fontaine, dealership in town, because one of the problems was like, I can't fit any more in here. And then I
Your
grew so
minivan, you need
much.
like a whole truck.
Yeah. So they were giving me like the big, commercial vans kind of thing that I could pick up on Thursday night and return back. And so that worked well until it grew so much that I was dealing in 2 semis coming to my location every Friday morning.
A 40-person volunteer team, 2 semi trucks. That is, Erica, that is amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
I also
it was cool.
that's so cool. I mean, I also want to say for the folks that are just joining us here, like we do this every week and it gets better every week. Like so guys, please feel free the new folks to join the chat. To use if you have any question, Benjamin, I think you have a question. Matt, I think you had a question. For Erica, I will ask those to Erica. She has so much good information to tell us today. So use the Campfire chat right above the Campfire room to ask those questions in the chat, and I'll make sure to work those in. Erica, we actually have the next poll question that the everyone in the chat voted on as well.
Mhm.
Why did you think this big idea would work? Like, what was going through your head? Just put us in your mind space.
The big idea of the starting the business or like the food part?
Both. I mean, choose all of the
Okay.
above. Yeah.
I think I've always had a really good skill or ability to see where need is, and not necessarily like people in need, but like a gap in the system. Like, oh, we're not doing this, but I could do that. So it was one of those situations where there was a lot of parenting sites and blogs and things like that I would read to find things to do, but a lot of them well, in all of them, they didn't focus on the free and the cheap. So for me, that was a niche that I could do because I'm like, that's what I'm obsessed with. That's what makes our budget go further. I wanted my kid to be exposed to many STEAM things as he could. So for me, like, was like, well, if I'm interested in this, other people will be. And I think people messaging me constantly about just how I was living my life was also the drive to say, there's a need for this. No one's doing it. So that was really it. And then for the food, I think I definitely, most of the time have like this no fear attitude, like I can do this and, I can, figure out the rest later, like kind of jump in head first. And, I ended up being, good at logistics and good at getting the word out. I
And
was at
marketing and the
line.
whole 9 yards.
What'd you say?
I said in the marketing and the whole 9 yards, right? Just
Yeah, I
adding on the
think so.
layers.
It was like, at the age I was, like everything I'd done in my past life fed into this.
Mhm.
I mean, even like, in my 20s, I used to make axles for trucks or dualies. And so I went through this whole process of lean manufacturing. So every week I was constantly tweaking that line. So we'd had less traffic. We could move it faster. I'd place people that were really good at what they were doing in that right spot, or move people around, or even ask them, like, do you like to talk to the people about how many boxes they need or stuff them in the car? Like, where's your skill set here? What do you love doing? Or what do you want to switch it up? So we had this amazingly smooth line where we'd move all those people through that line in
Yep.
a 2 to 2.5 hour time span. So I think that was really it, is like, I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs, when we start something, it's like we usually have experience from before that we pull from to kind of mix it all together. So could I have started this 20 years ago? I don't know. Probably not. But because I had all of this together and this, strong desire to help people and the ability to help people, like I kind of look at myself. And then it went from there. Like we, did diaper drives and coat drives, and we spearheaded a remodel of a women's shelter. Like we did so many things in the last 2 years. And it was just like, well, I did this. Like, what's stopping me from trying
Yeah.
something else? Right.
What's next? Yeah.
Yeah. But I just think, like, there's that fire in a lot of us to say, all right, I'm going to try this. I'm going to gather people. I'm going to collaborate, because I was reaching out to other organizations, and I just kind of saw myself as a bridge, like where there was surplus over here and need over here. Like, how can I be the bridge in the middle to make it work on both sides?
I think that experience particularly is interesting. You talked about your experience, working with trucks. You talked about like running the logistics and operations, and that seems to be something that's like a natural calling to you. What did it look like for you managing a team of 40 volunteers, right? Because you're not paying them to be there. It's your mission, it's your drive that keeps them showing up every day. Like, what did that process look like
Yeah.
for you?
Well, and some of my volunteers were people that needed food. My very first volunteer was Muhammad. He came every week, and in that, I think it was the third week, he said, "Hey, we've all been watching you in town." Like all the old guys that sip coffee on the lawn in the corner parking lot, and they're like, "Are you just doing this with this little kid?" I was like, "Yeah," and he's like, "You need help." I'm like, "Yeah, I hadn't thought that far." I just kept doing it because I was like, "Well, if it takes us a little longer, I'll move these boxes," and it really was like a slick system. And he said, "I'll tell you what." He's like, "If you save me a box at the beginning, I'll help you." And I'm like, "Really? That's amazing." So I hadn't even thought that far of like, I could recruit volunteers. I was just in the mode of like getting it done, right?
Yeah.
And so he did, but what was amazing is he spoke Arabic. So the whole thing changed. Like the whole line changed, because now people were able to communicate with me, because before, like I would just point to the boxes and put, a one finger, two finger kind of thing. And that was
Yeah.
our communication. And so people are starting to come up to me and they're like, "This is so cool now, because we wanted to thank you," or "We wonder where you came from," and so they would start to tell me their story, and Muhammad would start to help interpret. And then he would find out other families that were in need or recently in need. So we would, recruit someone else to go, drop that at their porch, so we became this community. And then it was in week 3 too. I would always ask people, because the traditional way to come up to a food line is like you ask people how many people are in their family, because I was telling everyone in line, like, if you have, several kids, you're going to need 2 boxes. Like, one box isn't enough. And then all of a sudden it dawned on me, like, we now have a couple volunteers, a couple of my friends. So a lot of my friends were working from home or were unemployed. And so they knew they were going to go back to work eventually, but they're like, I would love to give back. What a great way for me to get back. It's easy. You've got it all in place. I just show up. So a lot of that, it was a lot of my friends at first and family. And then it just grew from there. And then Patrick was, as an 8-year-old, like, empowering his friends to join us. So I'm a big one, like, kids can volunteer at like 2.5, 3 years old. They can just do little projects. So he would break down the cardboard boxes, or he would, pick up stuff, keep the line tidy, talk to the people, so everybody had this spot. But in that week 3, I realized, like, oh my gosh, like, why does everyone have to drive here and stand in line? So I said, what we're going to do now is start asking people how many families they want to serve. And that changed it. Like, people started looking me in the eye and they're like, oh my gosh, really? I'm like, yeah. Like, is your neighbor like at work, or can they not get out? Can they not get here? Like, why is it fair for you to be here and not them, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, like, no one does that. I'm like, well, this is my line, my rules. Like, would you like to do that? So now what was cool, week after week, they were sending like a designated driver and alternating, and they'd pick up for the other families. And now they were taking care of each other. And multiple times people would come up to me and say, you know what, like, this changed me, because I'm a giving person and it's just in my nature to give. But this pandemic hit and I'm now in a food line. I've never been in a food line before. And I've lost the ability to help people out. And that changed it. Like, people started looking me in the eye and they're like, oh my gosh, really? I'm like, yeah. Like, is your neighbor like at work, or can they not get out? Can they not get here? Like, why is it fair for you to be here and not them, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, like, no one does that. I'm like, well, this is my line, my rules. Like, would you like to do that? So now what was cool, week after week, they were sending like a designated driver and alternating, and they'd pick up for the other families. And now they were taking care of each other. And multiple times people would come up to me and say, you know what, like, this changed me, because I'm a giving person and it's just in my nature to give. But this pandemic hit and I'm now in a food line. I've never been in a food line before, and I've lost the ability to help people out. So you've given that back to me. Like, I can now help my neighbors. I can now do something for someone and not feel like so isolated, so lonely, and that has been taken away from me. So my heart is now full, and so is my belly.
I mean, and your journey to get to this point, to like, accumulate all the experience, the skills and logistics to like make this work. Like, was there a moment, in your journey as an entrepreneur where you needed to lean on your community to like keep going and keep believing in yourself? Like, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was lots of, pitfalls along the way, but I really did. I had a really, really good community. I was in a lot of networking groups before this, so I was leaning on all the different people that I came into contact in my life, working at an agency and just being in the community and saying, like, we need to rally around this. I need to move the food. This food is fresh and it will, go to waste. And we never wasted one apple at any of those weeks. We always made sure, it went away. And even if we had a couple boxes left over, which wasn't often, we would take it to a community fridge, or, there was other various community kitchens, food pantries and stuff in town. So now I knew more and more and more of this cool network of people doing really cool things in the city. And we worked together. Sometimes I would add to the line and get the opportunity to add milk, but that too, like, it's summer, so I don't have a fridge out there, so we've got to move it fast. And if we're not, like, I need to find someone else that can store it. So it was neat kind of meeting a lot of people in the city doing really big things, grassroots stuff, and connecting all of that. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Wow. And I mean, I think you shared so many nuggets about your personal journey and the impact that you've had. Could you share some nuggets of advice? Like, what would you share with other entrepreneurs that are looking to have impact and looking to provide value to their communities and people's lives? Like, what advice would you share with them?
Um, for me, like, I think many of us have sat through our lives and like, I wish I would have done something right. And so if you have that already going in you, I would say to just start. Like I started, I didn't know what I was doing. And along the way, could I have done things better? Of course. But I learned along the way. And I also continuously applied what I learned in real time. I didn't do something for all those weeks and not grow, the whole giveaway, but grow as a person, so I was taking away, like sitting there every week and going, okay, how did this week go? What could I have done different? Who else needs to know about this? That kind of thing. And so I was constantly, going through those motions. And also with my own business, like, did I think I was ever going to do this? No, but I had my ear to the community and I was like, I could do that. But had I not, like, I would have never pivoted my business. It changed my entire business model. I went from just putting out resources for people to now running my own events.
Yeah.
I was now making sure that if I did a school supply giveaway, that it wasn't like at a big, church or something on the fringe of town that you'd have to get to. I put myself in neighborhoods. I put myself in the corner where you could walk to. I was trying so hard to make things more inclusive and more accessible.
I mean, I think something that you really excel at is logistics, and you mentioned finding a problem and finding a need and solving for that. I think a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes might think from different perspectives. Like they might be thinking, okay, like what's my bottom line, or okay, like what's this really cool thing that I want to make. Like, what's your philosophy on like how do you find a need? And you said that you're good at tweaking the system and finding the need. What does that process look like for you?
I think first you have to look at what your own skill sets are. So, say you're in that mode of like, God, I wish I could start something or invent something. A lot of really good things happen, and it was a really, somewhat small idea. Just if we think about like how food delivery system works, it was probably someone sitting around like a pizza delivery person that was like, we could do this better, or we could do this differently, or we could start approaching businesses and, saying, hey, get on our app and, we have delivery drivers for you. There's all kinds of like tech things like that out there that don't have to be the one solution that saves everyone's life. Sometimes it's just making your life easier or better. And so I think it really is like, what are you good at and what could you give to the world, big or small? And I just think any small idea, we shouldn't even use that word. It's not small. It can grow to something, or it could just be this one thing that everyone's like, oh my gosh, I use that daily or weekly. I love this. It changed the way I did stuff. So I think the best thing is to not dumb your own idea down. That don't think that like, well, someone's going to think of this or someone's going to steal it. I'm not going to talk about this idea. Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Because the thing is, like, someone could copy what you do, but the passion that you have to invent that or put that into motion will not be there. And when you meet with investors or do a pitch competition and you just got this person that's like, yeah, I'm kind of copying this thing over here, you can hear it in their voice. You're just like, you're not invested in this thing. You just know it's going to be a good moneymaker. And that's fine too. And people do well with that. But gritty grassroots stuff, like when you hear someone talk about it, you're like, oh man, this is cool. I'm on board. What's she need?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm like, where can I sign up? After listening to you, I'm like, where can I sign up? Like, how can I help? So I think
and that was it. I mean, I used tech to move it. Like I would get on video. I would post pictures of like what we were doing in the community. So that was it too. People would just be in my DMs of like, what can I do? I'm like, oh my God, show up at 8:30 on the corner of Holbrook and Joseph Campa. That's it, and I made it really easy too. It wasn't like this whole thing to sign up. And, I just was like, if I just make it super easy and accessible for people to join in, and also that it wasn't time slots, because I knew a lot of people might help before they went to work. And in my experience, like the more hands, the better, right?
Yeah.
But that also can mean like that could just be an hour relief. So yes, come down for an hour. The more the merrier. I mean, one time I put out like the muscle emoji, like
Yeah, the
that one,
arm muscle, yeah.
because I was like, for some reason, there was a certain week where everybody was going somewhere and people were slowly going back to work. And I'm like, oh my God, now I have like all this massive food to move. I'm out of so many volunteers this week. So I'm like, anybody volunteers wanted. You know who showed up? The Hamtramck Fire Department.
Wow.
And I cried. They showed up with a huge team and the fire truck so the kids could all see the fire truck. So, because we served a lot of families in line, and it was beautiful. And I was like, how did you guys know? And he's like, we saw that muscle emoji. And I was dying.
We knew we were needed.
At work, huh? He was like, we just watch you doing this. And he said, we might have to go for an emergency, or, teams might have to come and go. And they came a couple times, and it was pretty cool. And then also, like, when I was doing that food giveaway, I was like, wow, we already have a community event, right? Like, that is what we're doing here. So why not add other resources? So when it got cold, we gave out hats and mittens. We did pop up little free libraries some weeks. What else did we do? We had the ACLU come out. We had the census come out. So, we're like, I'm seeing this many people every Friday morning. Like, what other resource could we give them?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm blown away. Erica, I want to say thank you so much for all of the advice and expertise and just your passion and leading with that. I hope everyone has gained so much from the conversation here today. Thank you, Erica, so much for joining us here today. Thank you, Erica, so much.
And
I
like,
appreciate
anyone
everyone.
can reach out. Like, I'm all about collaboration over competition. Like, I'm constantly pivoting. So if there's a need, I'm like, let's figure it out. Let's do it together.
Absolutely. I'm excited. That's what we're here to do. That's the community.
I love it.
That's what we're doing.
Thank you.
If you'd like to join the Accelerate Collective and attend future campfires, visit accelerateamerica.com/join and check out our future guest at accelerateamerica.com/campfire. Take care.